October Lunch and Learn. My name is Andy Stubbs, and I am with TBNG Consulting, a local IT solutions and managed services firm in Milford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us on this rainy Friday. To help brighten your day, our keynote is Matt Fusaro, a senior security engineer from our sister company Vancord, a subsidiary of TBNG Inc. Years ago, TBNG responded to the growing need in the market for cybersecurity solutions by forming Vancord to provide holistic security fundamentals that clients were demanding. Matt has a dozen years of cybersecurity and IT experience, including proactively preventing ransomware and advising on advanced threat protection to clients through services and select partnerships. Matt was one of the first employees at TBNG Consulting and is a founding member of Vancord. Currently, he spearheads the design and implementation of security solutions and is an integral member of any incident response engagement. He is one of the team's most experienced specialists, so please share any questions you may have in the chat section during the presentation. I will be monitoring those and pass them on to Matt as time allows. If we run out of time, we'll follow up after our Zoom meeting. So Matt, it's your Zoom.
Hey everyone, thanks Andy for the introduction. Yeah, so like Andy said, I've been working in the Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York area, advising clients for about 12 years, and I started at TBNG back in 2010, I think it was 2008, 2010, somewhere in there. A couple of years ago, we started Vancord up to, like Andy said, address the cybersecurity market. Myself and several other people that started Vancord, we've been working together on various projects for quite some time. And it just made sense at this point to work on security because it's kind of our passion and what we really like to do, right? Today we're going to be going over some ransomware cases that we've come across to kind of change up the presentation a little bit. I know a lot of the presentations that have been given about ransomware really focus on a lot of specifics about what is it, what does it do to you. I wanted to be more dive in a little bit more and show you exactly how a ransomware attacker will get into your network, why they do it, how you can address actually defending yourself against these things, and how you can be prepared if you do end up in the situation. Most of the time what we see is clients are ill-prepared for these things, and it really hurts them, and it ends up costing them in several different ways, right? And those costs can get exorbitant very quickly, and that not just because of services that you need to bring in, but generally it forces a big organizational change when you're not ready for it and you're not planning. And that can be stressful on resources. It can be stressful on management to actually implement a lot of the things that you're being told that you need to do. So I think hopefully this will give you some insight into how you can go about protecting yourself a bit better and being a little bit more knowledgeable about how these things actually go down. So let me share my screen now and we'll start the presentation here. And as I'm going through, if you have questions, feel free to send them through. I don't have a problem stopping and answering some questions as long as they're pertinent. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. There we go. All right. I think everyone can see the screen at this point. If not, just let me know.
We're good.
All right. So let's go over how you actually get ransomware in the first place, because I think a lot of people have an idea about it, but it'll be nice to see some numbers and talk about how it actually comes in. So what we've noticed as we've done our incident responses here is that a lot of organizations are kind of, they're under a lot of pressure financially, right? As it is. And especially during the pandemic, that puts a lot more pressure on finances, and what that causes is a lack of proactive measures against security, right? And because of the types of people that you're dealing with that actually perform these attacks, they're not going to care about what your financial situation is, right? They're going to try and capitalize on your weaknesses right now. One of the most common ways that we see ransomware actually coming into your network is through phishing, and that's pretty obvious, right? You get those phishing emails probably pretty consistently, asking you to buy gift cards or to transfer money, click on links that some of them are pretty obvious, right? Others are very well crafted, right? They are either able to use your domain in a nefarious way and solicit you to click on links or download documents that will embed the attacks in them. And some of them can even be voicemails that are left or phone calls that you get that are asking you to perform something on your computer, and they might try to act like a vendor that you trust, or a bank that you work with, to make it more legitimate, right? And that's typically where we see most of the ransomware events actually be sourced from. Another popular one is brute force attacks. And typically brute force attacks are done by automated services. It's not someone sitting at a computer typically that are trying to break in. They have a fleet of machines out on the web somewhere. They could be in the US, they could be in other places as well. And they're just looking for open services like your remote VPNs, your remote desktops that you use to actually get to your systems that are either in your office or in your server room. And they keep banging away at that until they discover a password that they're able to use. Once they have that, that's when they try to launch additional attacks like ransomware or other malware that you might see. Coming up third is web-based compromises. This is when you either purposely click on a link or you inadvertently go to a website that might have a weaponized advertisement. They may have compromised a legitimate website. So let's say that you go to, Wells Fargo or Bank of America or something like that, a legitimate website, and they've been attacked. And the attacker does have the ability sometimes to actually modify links so that it will cause you to bring in files or documents or just run code that can cause malware to be downloaded or executed on your machine. And I like to talk about the last one a little bit because I think that a lot of people have a kind of a preconceived notion that there's a lot of attackers out there that are exploiting your services, right? So you may have some websites that you expose on your firewall for your company, so whatever resource it might be, and they're sitting there exploiting that to get into your network. It's becoming a much less common problem, mostly because these days there's a lot more effort in the software development community to address these things. Most companies have implemented a firewall or some type of system that will catch the known exploits. And quite honestly, coming up with an exploit that hasn't been seen before, you might have heard the term 0-day. A 0-day would be something that hasn't been seen out in the wild before, and maybe something that they custom made just for your business or just for the application that you're running. It's just not that common. And if you have a good practice of patching, keeping up to date with your third-party applications, you don't typically have these issues. And that's why it's a much less common thing. And the other question that we get during an IR, it seems to come up pretty early on, is why are they after me, right? I'm just a small business. I don't have much. Why would they come after me? Really, the answer is mostly it's opportunistic, right? they found something open. It was easy for them to get into, so they did it. Verizon does a report every year that they call the data breaches of incident response report. And they found between last year and this year that 86% of the breaches were all financially motivated, right? So they're looking for either ransomware where they're looking to get paid for decrypting your files, or they're trying to steal data that will benefit them financially somehow. So they might be able to sell that data. They might be able to use credit card information, other personal information to open loans, etc. Right? And another really popular target last year, and this is data from Barracuda Networks, was local governments. My understanding from what I've seen as far as the reports that have come out, and honestly just experience, is that a lot of local governments, they need to be up and operating, right? Because they have towns and cities to keep in operation. They are much more likely to actually pay that ransom out. So now they've focused on these because you have a couple things at play. These people pay a ransom out. The other thing too is usually you're kind of cash strapped and they're not putting a lot of money into their IT. So you usually have 1 to 2 people that are actually managing the whole system. So that includes desktops, servers, applications, what have you. And also they're not typically people that are at a top tier of security, right? They don't understand how to properly secure their networks. And it's no fault of their own. Sometimes it's the janitor that's been promoted to an IT director, right? So they see these as very easy targets to be successful with, and that's why they go after them. And I'll just stop and see if there's any questions on this. Let's see. I'm actually having trouble pulling up the questions here. Let me see.
I'll keep an eye on them for you, Matt. We're all set.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's move on to phishing. Because phishing was the most popular method that we see, I'd like to go over it just a little bit so that you understand how that all works. Essentially, you'll get an email in, and what they're trying to do is either pose as somebody else, your CEO in your company, a manager, someone that they find on a website usually. So if you go to your company's About Me page or About Us page, you find people in the company. Those are the ones that they're going to try and impersonate, right? Because they assume that you trust them, and if you receive an email from them, you will do what they ask. And a point about, I guess, phishing in general is that you can employ some of the best products out there. You can have several services that are scanning for phishing and for bad emails. No matter how good they are, they're going to get a phishing email through. Right. It's unless you have someone sitting there reviewing every single email for its authenticity, you're just never going to get that 100% detection rate, right? And the attackers, they work on large numbers, right? They send as much of that phishing email campaigns out to you as they can, and all they need is one to slip through, right? And this is why, at least at Vancord, we really push making sure that your users are trained and aware of how a phishing email can come in, what it looks like. And most of the time, that's really where you can catch a phishing email, right? Is reading it and really understanding, is this the type of language that the person that sent this to me would use? One thing that I usually tell managers is try to use a little bit less demanding grammar when you are usually communicating with your people, because in most phishing emails, they want things done with haste, right? They want you to do it right now. They are very formal when they ask for something. And also look for bad spelling or poor grammar. most of the phishing campaigns that you're going to get and the attackers that are looking to do things like ransomware, English is probably their second language, right? Sometimes you'll have very good English speakers that write these, and those are really successful phishes because they look legitimate. But if you're receiving something from, for example, the World Health Organization, and the grammar is poor and there's spelling errors everywhere, more than likely it's not a legitimate email, right? So just, I guess, take the time, be mindful about how the email actually looks, how it reads, what the greeting looks like. You know, you see it in here, "Dear Sir." That's very generic. They probably wouldn't make a greeting like that where it's addressing you. They may not know your sex or your gender. It's very difficult to be that generic and I'm sorry, that specific and have a legitimate email, right? Another thing is it's okay to be suspicious about email. I think that's one thing that we try to push to the users quite a bit. It's okay to pick up your phone and call the person that sent that email and say, "Hey, you know, I received an email from you. You're asking me to do this wire transfer. Is this actually you or no?" Right. So use multiple mediums to communicate with people. If you do have to have someone perform a financial transaction, if you have to send an email with details, make sure you call them up or use your messaging platform. Use a couple different methods so that they know that it was you that actually sent that and it's legitimate. So what I want to do now is actually go through how an attack actually happens, right? So this is a little bit of a, you know, underneath the covers kind of discussion. There's a lot on this page. I'm not expecting you guys to read all of this, but basically what I want to do is go through how this actually comes in, what they're doing while they're in your network, and when does the ransomware actually appear, right? And this is a more specific case study of a combination of tools that attackers use. This is called, one of the most popular ones out there is Emotet and TrickBot. The two of them are old banking Trojans, actually. They originally were looking for financial information out of banks, and some ransomware gangs found that it was very useful for gaining a foothold inside of networks so that they can distribute ransomware out. So typically what happens is you'll have a group, some organized criminal organization that will look for their targets, right? And their targets might be because of your sector, because of your geography. You know, maybe you're affiliated with a certain group that they don't agree with. There's just many factors at play, right? And once they find their targets, that's when they usually will start their phishing campaign towards you. When a phishing campaign is successful and they get someone to either download a document or click a link, typically what will happen is there will be a smaller program that gets deployed that doesn't do a whole lot, really. And all it really does is communicate back to home base, if you will. If you look in more technical articles, it's usually called command and control. And essentially what it's doing is it's sending some information back saying, "Hey, this phishing campaign was successful. I'm now installed on someone's machine. Here's the information I know about that machine, and I'll await further instructions," right? Once that happens, they'll either decide to go further with it, or they might do nothing. And hopefully, either before this happened or after this has happened, your endpoint protection has caught this and it's been stopped, or your firewall has stopped this. In cases where this doesn't, you know, one of the first things that they usually do is try to disable your AV altogether, right? And malware has gotten very good at doing that. There's lots of automated tools out there. You don't need to be a coding genius to do this anymore. These tools are very available to attackers to disable protections, get through firewalls without being detected. It's becoming a much more complicated process to actually detect what's going on. And these messages that they send back and forth are usually very small and hard for someone to actually detect or correlate to something that's not supposed to be happening, right? So now that they've got a command and control tunnel where they're sending information back and forth, they usually push down another agent that does more work. Typically what this will do is try to find ways to either steal more information. So look through email, look for passwords on the computer, look for Wi-Fi passwords as well, and spread, right? So once they have some authentication information or a way to log on to other systems, they will use that information to start spreading to as many machines as they possibly can. So we do have one question, what is Cobalt Strike? So this is kind of pertinent here. Cobalt Strike is a automated exploitation tool, which is public, and you'll actually, if you've ever done a penetration test before, your pen testers may have used this tool. Essentially, they keep a repository of exploits that are disarmed, if you will, so that they will implement a proof of concept and test that the exploit works, but not actually do damage to the machine, right? Malware like TrickBot actually uses systems like this where they will push down a tool like Cobalt Strike and use an automated tool to see if they can use exploits to spread across the network. And that's in that lateral movement phase that we have down here. And now that it's been able to spread across the network, one of the big targets that it looks for is going to be your domain controllers. So if you're running a Microsoft Windows network at all, you may or may not know, domain controllers are kind of the brains of the operation. They hold all your logon information, and compromising one of those is kind of the crown jewel, right? Once you have that, you can float around the network as you please. It's also a big target for them because if they were to encrypt it, that's really important. And if you don't have backups, you can be out of service for quite some time. So they have a much higher chance of getting their ransom paid if they do that. So once they've done this lateral movement and they have some good credentials to use on the network, that's typically when the teams that run things like Emotet and TrickBot actually stop. They like to use this as an opportunity to make some money on their end. What they do is they actually post access on the dark web to people who are interested in doing the encryption, right? And typically, they'll take a cut of the ransom if it gets paid. And like I said, they'll also sell that access so that it's financially it's good for them, right? In a particular incident that we saw, the Ryuk ransomware, which you may have heard of before, was pushed down, and that group is the one that actually did the encryption and wanted the ransom for it, right? So that's kind of how this process works. It's not just you've downloaded a file, now everything's going to be encrypted. While that is possible, typically they're trying to get a bigger foothold in your network, and they may be there for months at a time. It could be a couple days, it could be a whole year. It really depends on how interested in you they are, and if they were able to accomplish their lateral movement that they were looking to do. So Christopher has a question about protecting yourself while working at home. I'm actually going to hold that one till the end because I do have some preventative and deterrence types of stuff that we can talk about, if that's okay. So let's talk about the dark web a little bit, because I think that a lot of people have a skewed vision of what it is, and I'll tell you, I would say it's the fault of our industry. It's being used as a marketing ploy to make it seem very confusing and huge and infinite, and that you can't understand it. Okay, and I'd like to tell you that that's just not the case. It's good to remember that there are people that are in business to do this, right? So it's just like any other business sector in the economy. The pandemic has mostly not affected this business at all, and it's really because it's always been a kind of an internet-based community that runs this, right? They don't need to be together to do it. Developers that create this malware and exploits, they don't need to be in the same room. So there hasn't really been an effect on pricing that you see on the dark web, or services that are available. If anything, it's probably increased now that people are at home more. And you can see here that there's some data from what's called a threat intelligence company, where basically their entire existence is based on gathering data about what attackers are doing out in the wild, and they compile that for the security industry, and people subscribe to that data, right? And what they found is that crypto services are pretty much at the same prices as they were before the pandemic started. Access and data, basically what that means is selling the ability for other groups to get into a network, or they're just trying to sell the data that they were able to actually exfiltrate. So they may have health information, they may have social security numbers, loan numbers, you name it, right? It's really all up for grabs. And same thing with credit card data. The prices just aren't changing that much. So if anyone thought that the pandemic would have an effect on this, probably not at all. And the data seems to show that as well. So I kind of want to move on to a controversial subject at this point. This one's tough because I do think it's a little unfair sometimes to say you should never pay a ransom, especially in the case where you may not have an option, right? We have come across companies that just didn't have an option. They had no backups. They had nothing. They had very important data that needed to be up. And sometimes that paying needs to be facilitated, right? Typically, we never advise clients to pay ransom. It is an absolute last-ditch effort. And recently, I think over about a month or so ago, I'd have to actually look that up again. I can't remember exactly when this memo came out, but there is a Department of Treasury sub-department, if you will, called the Office of Foreign Assets Control, that sent out a memo that essentially it's vague enough where they are now able to prosecute if you pay a ransom and the group that you've paid the ransom to is on a list of embargoed countries, possible terrorists, you name it. And this list, I've looked for the actual list, I can't find it. So I think essentially what they're actually trying to do is stop people from paying ransom, because it does encourage more ransomware events, right? If you dismantle their source of income, they're going to be less likely to continue that business model. But it does bring up a question of what's the line, right? So when you do have a situation where paying the ransom is your only option, we now have to deal with a legal matter here where we don't really have any precedent. We don't know if they actually are prosecuting people or not, but they have made that tool available to the legal community if they need to, right? So what we suggest is, like I said, don't pay the ransom unless you really need to, and if you need to, get the authorities involved, right? We would facilitate that if you were working on incident response with us to talk to the authorities and find the right people that we need to talk to make sure that what you're doing is legal. And just remember that even if you do have to pay that ransom, there are no guarantees. You're dealing with unreasonable people. They're not there to have a equitable business transaction. They're there to steal your money. So they may negotiate in good faith until you actually make a payment, and that once that money is in their pocket, it's really, you just have to hope, right? You have to cross your fingers. So that's why we usually leave that to last ditch effort and always consider not doing it. So I thought it would be helpful for us to kind of describe how we handled a rather large ransomware incident and what that would look like. So I'm going to walk through it. There's a lot in this one, so I'm going to kind of walk through it kind of quickly. So I don't want to take up too much time with this, but essentially, if you haven't been through an incident response before, it may be kind of a question mark for you as to, you know, how long is this going to take? What's it going to look like? And, you know, what's this going to cost me if this is going to take, you know, 3 months, right? So just keep in mind that you may not have the same experience here. That it might be shorter, it might not be as big, but I thought this was a good size to kind of describe how our whole process works. So I apologize that 209 got clipped off on the right there, but essentially what this is a timeline of how the actual infection started all the way up to where things were remediated and business was back 100%, right? So we had a couple of phases here where we start over on the left here where we had no visibility into, and when I say we, I mean Vancord before we were called into the incident response, right? We didn't have any visibility into what was going on. The company was trying to handle this on their own, right? Some malware had gotten into the network. The initial vector, unfortunately, we weren't ever able to uncover because they didn't have logging or backups that were far enough back so that we could find the data for that. As you can see, it could be a long process, but from actual detection of this stuff to when the first incident or when the first event actually happened, right? So back in December, this company had malware come in, and then it was all the way up until February, the middle of February, where an encryption event actually happened, right? It started encrypting workstations, then they moved on to servers and other critical infrastructure. It essentially brought them to their knees. They were down pretty hard. Once that happened, it took a couple of days to actually discover what type of malware it was and what it was doing. And they finally had to reach out to us to start looking at what was going on, right? I'm sorry, they had to reach out to their contractors to start rebuilding some of their infrastructure. They worked with an MSP that helped them build their server environment, their network environment, and they had started to restore servers from backup, stand up some new infrastructure, and get going again. Unfortunately, what happened was a re-encryption event. They weren't able to eradicate everything out of the network, and it still had a foothold in there. So when new servers came online, they were re-encrypted. Another couple of issues that we had there were we had no visibility into what was going on in the network. And what I mean by that was firewalls weren't logging. We didn't have centralized information logging for any servers. It was basically, if you wanted to know what was going on a particular system, you had to log into it and get that data out. That's a real problem when something's been encrypted. Logs may not be available at all. They may have been cleared by the attacker, which was the case in this on several systems. You just can't trust the integrity of information from a system that's already had malware installed on it. There's multiple ways where they can actually obfuscate that data. But once it took us a couple of days to push some tools down to actually get some visibility into the network. We focused on that really hard because we wanted to make sure that we knew exactly where everything was coming from, because we knew we had a large net that we had to cast to find all the systems that had this particular malware on it so that we didn't have more encryption events. Okay. Once we were able to do that, we had tools that we could see what was going on. We triaged all their branch offices. So this particular client had, I think it was around 8 small branch offices. These were mostly, it was a large law firm, and they had branch offices throughout the state that they worked with. They were also affected by the malware. We essentially cut them off except for some critical services so that we didn't have more lateral movement. And that brings us to about the middle of March. And then once that was all contained, somewhere around the end of March is when, or beginning of April, we had most of their critical services back up and running. We were able to detect how the encryption events were happening, how they were moving laterally through the network. We made quite a few changes to how they were doing security inside with what they had. We didn't really have the opportunity at that time to implement new software products or hardware, but we did utilize what they had to defend against another encryption event. Most of them were configuration changes, some process changes as well. Not logging on to every server with the same username and password that had a lot of privileges. It was quite a holistic approach that we had to take to that. But once all this was done, they had to report their breach to some higher entities, and because it was a law firm, they had to transfer a lot of data back and forth with one of their partners. That triggered assessments. It also forced them to do quite a bit of looking into one of the, essentially it was kind of like an EDI system, if you're familiar with that. They transferred data back and forth for payments and things like that. And the partner wanted to make sure that this particular law firm was doing everything they could to protect the data that they had to consume themselves as well. So that, again, took almost a month, maybe a little bit more of back and forth, having another auditor come in, look at that stuff. So it was quite a lengthy process. And finally, at the end of all of this, they're in good standing. They're ready to move forward to implement some more protective controls, proactive controls. But as you can see, all the way from December of 2018 all the way through July of 2019 is essentially the scope of what that infection looked like. So it was a pretty large event for them. So a 4-week outage, they had no production services available, manual payments for everything. So they had to go back to pen and paper to do any of their work. They had all transactions between their vendors had to be scanned by both us and the vendor as well. So that caused delays in payments, delays in court dates. It was quite disruptive for them. And this is something that I think you guys, you'll want to see something like this. Now, this is a big number, but we have to remember this was a larger organization, I think there's about 900 actual lawyers that work at this firm. But you can see these costs add up quite a bit. And this is the cost of not making sure your backups are good, being a little loose with privileges. And they were also there was a very small IT staff. You're looking at 900 users. They only had about 3 people there that were taking the brunt of this work, and they were relying on a third party for small things here and there. So it ended up costing them pretty big in the end. And so what this really comes down to is your backups are everything. If there is one takeaway that you get from this presentation, I hope it's this slide. This is your best protection. It's not firewalls. It's not good endpoint protection. This is the most important. Making sure that your backups are good, that you're backing up the right data, that you're keeping it around long enough. Sometimes storage isn't free, right? So you do have to keep that in mind, that there is a cost associated with that. But sometimes that cost is worth bearing if the consequence is that you have to pay for incident response services, be down for a while, and ask yourself, how much time can I be down and be able to absorb that cost for my business, right? Sometimes that's, I could be down for a week. Sometimes you can't be down for more than a couple hours, or maybe even less than that. And the one thing that everyone always forgets about backups is you need to test them. It's a process and it takes time. But too many times I've seen backups that were scheduled and they run every night and they're successful and everyone's happy. And then they try to get data out of that backup and it doesn't work. It's a sad day for everyone. No one really likes to go through that process. It can be a disaster. And finally, especially with the newer strains of ransomware, they actually have code in them to look for your backup systems. So if your backup systems on site are not secured properly, or if on site is the only location you keep some of these backups, you could be at risk of them encrypting your backups as well. That's a surefire way for them to get their ransom payment, right? So if you have nothing to go back to, then you're pretty much have your arms tied behind your back now. Make sure they're air gapped. Make sure you're transferring them somewhere where they're safe. They're not using the same authentication mechanisms. This is a really good opportunity to have kind of like a roundtable with your IT team to talk about this, and just come to the table with the one question I have at the bottom there is, how can an attacker break our backup system? Go through those scenarios, come up with as many as you can, and see if you've successfully protected yourself against those things.
Hey, Matt, real quick, there was a question about cloud backup. Is it better than on-site backup? I think from our perspective at TBNG, we recommend both on-site and off-site. But how do you want to answer that?
Sure. So this is an it depends answer. I would say generally, if you have a cloud backup, that it's good. Getting your data off of the site that it's currently resident on in production is always a good idea. But there's some caveats to it, right? Are you using the same usernames and passwords to access your backups? If you are, even if it's in the cloud, you're now putting that at risk. Cloud typically comes with the added benefit of redundancy in the cloud. You have more resilient drives, and quite honestly, the entire business model of a company that provides backup is to keep it safe, right? That's all they focus on. And well, make sure that you're with a company that's all they focus on, right? That, I suppose that should be said. A company that does a million other things, but hey, we also do backup, may not be the best company to go with, right? But yeah, making sure that you've got a separation between how you authenticate to your backups, that there's a copy in the cloud and not only in the cloud. That's another big situation there. And that's, I guess, not so much a security recommendation. It's also kind of an operational one as well. When all of your backups are only in the cloud and you need to restore, it can be difficult sometimes. You may not have internet. So for example, you've got a hurricane that comes through here, right? If you're out of power, you may not be able to get that stuff back to where you need it to go. It could also be a long time to bring that stuff down. If you've got lots of data, let's say a couple terabytes worth of data, and you've got a slow or a standard business class internet connection, it can take you hours and hours, sometimes days, to get that stuff back to your location and up and running. So it's something to think about. But yeah, but the general answer to that question is, yeah, cloud's better than nothing for sure. I always like seeing something on site plus a copy in the cloud if you can. That's usually the best way to do it. And so this is my last slide here. This is about actually deterring these types of events from happening. I think I'll address the work from home aspect first. The work from home is difficult with this. I'll be honest, it's been a lot of, it's been a big headache for IT departments, right? The reason is you need extra tools to properly manage, all the laptops and devices that are now not on your network. Most of the time they expected those things to be on site, so that they have the opportunity to do maintenance, to update software, et cetera. I'd say if there were a couple of bullet points to really protect yourself at home, would be make sure you're updating, patch as often as possible, and not just Windows updates. Make sure you're doing your PDF reader updates, that you're doing, if you get notifications for Flash or Office or whatever it might be on your machine, make sure you're keeping it up to date, and make sure that system is only used for business purposes. I know how difficult that is. You're working on it. The Amazon tab pops up and you get distracted, right? So you do the best you can to make sure that it's a single purpose machine and not used for general purpose. And finally, endpoint protection. Making sure that your machine has antivirus or endpoint detection and response tools on it. If you're unsure, ask your IT team. It's okay to call them up and say, hey, I just want to make sure that I've got some protections on my machine. I'm working at home all the time. You can either help me out with that or just tell me if I'm already all set. You guys are looking for like AV and EDR tool recommendations. There's a lot of them out there at this point. So personally, we work a lot with binary defense at this point. We do what's called managed EDR, where we have a SOC team actually looking at all of the data that comes through the endpoint detection and response tool. That may not be the solution for everyone. There's other products out there. We work a lot with SentinelOne as well. We've worked with Carbon Black in the past. A lot of it has to do with your experience in the field. That's definitely one of them. With EDR especially, they take a lot of care in feeding. You can't just put it out there and assume you're protected. You need someone looking at it. There's a lot of alarms that comes through. It can be a little noisy if it's not tuned properly. So, and the same thing is true for AV as well. Traditional AV just doesn't cut it anymore. Most of what you'll find out there for malware will be able to subvert that. The reason why we go towards what's called EDR at this point is it gives you a lot of extra data that AV is just not going to. So in the event that something does get through or there's not a detection for it, at least we can go back and take a look and see what it is that happened, who was affected, and how can we contain what's going on.
One thing,
yeah,
Matt, there's a question, any best combined antivirus with endpoint detection and response? I just want to say one thing. I think as far as antivirus goes, I think 100% of the breaches that we've seen have had antivirus. So I think that is a very, very thin layer of protection. Yeah.
So this can be a bit of a rabbit hole. So I don't want to go too far into it. But AV, for the most part, when you see something advertised as antivirus, they work on what's called signatures, right? So if you're not familiar with how that works, essentially it's kind of like a profile, or if you see a mugshot on TV and you're looking for that person, that's kind of how it matches it, right? There's certain features of the file or program that gets put on the machine that the AV will look for, and it's either going to catch it or it's not, right? There are lots of ways to subvert that, and you've got what is called in the industry next generation AV now, which essentially uses big pools of data to determine the behavior of programs to say whether or not it's good or bad. Those can be better. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you want a combination of both, right? You want, or all three, I should say. You want something that's going to catch the people that aren't so skilled and they're just pushing out your garden variety malware, right? And that would be your signature-based antivirus. You want some behavioral detection where it's going to take into account what type of actions it's performing, files that it's opening, things that are loading. It can get technical pretty quick. But that helps identify things that don't necessarily have a signature, might be brand new to out in the wild that no one's ever seen before. So it helps catch those things. And then the real power of an EDR is the data about what's going on the machine, whether it's good or bad, right? Because now we can go back and look and say, okay, this person opened up a Word document. Word loaded a very strange program. In addition to it, nothing caught it, but we know that something bad's happening on the network. So let's go back into the timeline and look and see what happened. I guess the comparison is if you don't have that data, it takes us 10 times longer to figure out what happened if it is actually if it's actually malware or if we actually have a breach. It's much more difficult for us to answer the questions that you're going to come to us with and say, who did it, what's affected, and do I need to report and get credit monitoring for people, right? Because those are the things that pop up in your head as soon as you have an incident. Data is king when it comes to incidents like this. So hopefully that answered the question. I know some of that was a little vague as far as how to, what product to choose. Ultimately, you're going to need someone to kind of advise you through that. It also depends on some of the other tools you're using, some of the vendors that you're working with. I mean, as far as what I can say, we've had good success with SentinelOne and binary defense, but that may not be the right answer for you. But so hopefully that helps. So as far as on a broader scale, what can you do to deter this type of activity? A big thing that, what we try to focus on when we're advising clients is to increase the number of steps for an attacker to be successful. Attackers are lazy. They're just like us. They don't want to do any work. They want to get that quick dollar. They're trying to get rich quick, get in and out and not be prosecuted, right? So put things in their path that it's going to make them do more work, and they're more likely to move on to the next person. So things like putting multi-factor authentication on your VPNs, your remote desktop gateways, pushing out to as many cloud services as you can. Most of them support it at this point. So whether you use something like Salesforce or pretty much anything. It's kind of hard to think about services at this point that don't support it. Enable multi-factor, and it's sometimes difficult because it's a cultural change for a lot of people. So I do suggest a stepped rollout with that, but it can have a big impact for not that much money. The buy-in for something like multi-factor can be a pretty low bar as compared to some of the other controls that can be put in place. Another thing we say is, always practice least privilege. Sometimes, if you're an IT administrator, you'll know what this means. Sometimes you don't need domain admin. You don't need all the credentials or all the permissions in the world to install a piece of software sometimes. That being mindful of the permissions you're giving yourself can really help you avoid lateral movement and bigger instances of a ransomware infection. And finally, just patch. Most of the time, these attackers are trying to use exploits that have been out for a while, but they know that most companies can't keep up with their patching schedule. So they try to take advantage of that. Just patching, it's free, just takes time, right? And if you're a more advanced company where you've done you've done some vulnerability assessments maybe, you think you've got a pretty good handle on addressing your patching, addressing your security controls, start looking into doing things like threat emulation practices. Bring a team in and do a dry run of a ransomware event or some other type of infection so that you can kind of test out your process, know what to expect, know where things are going to break, and close those holes up as you can. But in general, the strategy should be to layer your protection, right? That's been something that the security industry has been harping on for a long time because it does work. At the root of all this is making sure that your users are educated, because educated users can really deter a lot of what's going on by not falling victim to phishing, using your EDR, your firewalls, your SIM, logging, and then when you get to a more advanced stage, that's when it's time to start getting a SOC involved, right? You may not be at the size or level to actually do something like that, but that's kind of the overarching. A SOC would be something that is basically a large group of people that are looking at your environment, making sure that you're not being attacked, and looking at a lot of data for you. Okay, and I know we're coming up against time here, so I think I'm going to cut it off there and kind of open for questions. So I'm sure there's some. All right. So yeah, if any of you have any questions, I'm here for a little bit. Hopefully that was informative.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Matt, and thank the BRBC for this great event. It's a privilege to be part of the council, and we want to be of value as much as we can. So let us know how we can help if there's any follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to reiterate it. I appreciate your time, Matt and Andy, for helping with those questions, and thank everyone for attending. I think Matt is here for a couple more minutes if you do have any more questions. And otherwise, I will send this recording around and we'll put their contact info in it. So if you think of something and you are like, oh, I should have asked that, you can definitely send them an email. So
yeah, absolutely.
So we'll just give